My name is Gemma Allen, and my partner Ron Ladden and our associates Todd Glassman and Jessica Malmquist want to welcome you to this session of our think tank. Today's topic, Stalking in the Age of Technology, is both a wake-up call and a call to action. Stalking is the newest face of domestic violence. It has been the subject of newspaper and magazine articles, documentaries, and even the storyline on some major television primetime shows. In many respects, the legal system is still catching on to stalking and its techniques, and it is still catching up with its perpetrators. Like all forms of domestic violence, it is motivated by issues of power and control. Sometimes it is the methodology by which former partners and their spouses try to control each other and dominate those who they perceive have rejected them. Other times, it is perpetrated by mere acquaintances, even strangers, who become obsessed with their victims and begin a dance of terror. In recent news stories, we have dramatic examples of both types of stalking, some of them tragically ending in death. With this increased media attention has come some better understanding and more attention to the aggression and the intensity of stalkers, and some important legal progress. This year, for example, in Illinois, a new law was passed, which we commonly call the Bischoff Law. It allows judges to require satellite tracking of those stalkers who have more than once or repeatedly violated orders of protection. The law was enacted at the suggestion of Cindy Bischoff. She was a successful real estate broker. She was anyone we know. She lived in Arlington Heights. She was continually stalked by her ex-boyfriend, and she sought in vain for a legal remedy. She actually came to the court with suggestions on how she could be helped because she realized that she had now become imprisoned by her own stalker. Sadly, she was eventually slain by him, and he in turn killed himself. Her family and friends, however, persevered in lobbying the law that she had advocated, a law that might have saved her life and hopefully will save others. We're privileged this morning to have Jan Russell, who is a domestic violence advocate at the Chicago Police Department and one of the foremost experts in this field, domestic violence issues generally, as well as policies dealing with them, and the new form of stalking, which is cyber stalking. She will educate us this morning on the various areas where technology has actually enabled the stalkers and where we must become more vigilant, both as professionals and as individuals. I'm going to ask Jan to begin this morning, and I will tell you that we are going to be frightened as well as educated.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I appreciate being asked to come and do this presentation this morning. Okay, so I'm going to talk about stalking today, and primarily I'm going to be talking about technology, but I wanted to give you an overview of stalking generally before we get into technology issues. Now, one of the big issues we have with stalking statutes is that they all require a course of conduct. Now, in most states, stalking is a course of conduct that places a victim in fear. And that can be any kind of behavior. That can be phone calls, sending letters, making threats, any kind of behavior that would result in fear in the victim. Now again, because this is a course of conduct, it's difficult to investigate these cases, it's difficult to prosecute these cases. So if we're talking about a domestic battery, that's something that may occur over the course of a minute. Maybe the incident takes place over several minutes. It's a very concrete period of time that needs to be investigated and proven. When we're talking about stalking, because of that course of conduct, we're talking about numerous incidents that take place over a period of time. And so we need more evidence because we need to prove more things in order to be able to prosecute these cases. But some of the other problems, if you think about a victim coming forward, let's say we have a domestic violence situation, the victim is now living separate from the abuser, she leaves work and he's following her home. She's terrified, she goes to the police and say, you know, there's a history of domestic violence and he's following me home. And what will the police tell her? It's not a crime yet. Come back when he's followed you a second time. And so we have that sort of problem. What's the victim going to say at that place? Well, you don't care. You know, when are you going to care after he shoots me? And so victims feel that the police are not listening to them because they are not getting the response. Or if they come in and they talk about some behavior that isn't criminal, that isn't following in surveillance, they may not even be able to get a police report. Now, if you're an investigator, you have this case. You know, if you have a battery case, you know what you're investigating, and it's finite, it's over. But if you have a stalking case, things keep happening. So your case is never closed. You have to keep adding additional information, seeking additional evidence, trying to find out what's going on. I want to add that when I worked at the state's attorney's office, I worked on a homicide case where the victim had fled Chicago and was working in a restaurant in Lake County. And her abusive husband would go to the restaurant she worked and sit there all day while she worked. And he wasn't telling her, I'm going to kill you. He was trying to reconcile with her. And so when she talked to the police, their response was, well, that's a public place. What's the problem? But he was there every day she worked. He was there the entire shift she worked. What was he doing there? He was surveilling her. He wanted to find out, did she come to work today? Who did she talk to? Did she leave early? So there's a purpose to that behavior. Certainly we have restaurants in Chicago. He passed a lot of restaurants on the way. But again, not getting a response from law enforcement because it's a public place and he's not saying, I'm going to kill you. He's saying, I love you, come back to me. She said that he also called her repeatedly on the days that she didn't work. She said her phone rang constantly. She couldn't even count how many times he called her. But when he left her a message, it was, come back to me, I love you, not I'm going to kill you. She reported it to the police. They did not take that seriously as well. She ended up testifying against him in the divorce hearing, testified to the abuse she had suffered during their marriage, and the next night he brutally murdered her. During the police investigation, they found out he was calling her up to 57 times a day. Now, this is before cell phones. So if you're calling somebody 57 times a day, and you have to be at a landline to do that, that's taking up most of your life, isn't it? And so one of the things that we look at in stalking cases, in this obsessiveness, is how much energy is this abuser putting into this victim. And whenever we see that, we see somebody who is spending an extraordinary amount of time focused on this victim, we don't care what the behavior is. You know, we need to understand that his saying, I love you, I want you back, doesn't mean that he's any less dangerous than somebody who's sitting there saying, I'm going to kill you. So we also need to understand with stalking cases that these have a very long duration in many cases, that the average is about 2 years. There have been victims who have been stalked for 20 years. And stalkers also have this tendency to stalk people and sometimes to move on to other victims and come back to their previous victim. Yes. And so you may think, well, this is over now, this person's leaving me alone, and time passes, sometimes as many as, several years, and then the stalker comes back and starts up again with the very same intensity they left off with. And so they tend to be serial stalkers in that regard.